Only in Colorado can a city start with an illegal claim jump on a crooked grid, elect a Klan leader to design its aviation hub, and aggressively annex a rival town because they ban saloons. Hi, I'm Michael. I'm a Kentuckian learning a little bit more about the places that I travel, and today I'm learning about Denver, Colorado. As an aside, I consider this area of Colorado, the Front Range, to be kind of like a second home between friends, an old job, and just a general love for the area. I find myself coming back here often, but until today, I haven't really bothered to learn much about the area's history. And if you're new here, heads up, I regularly mispronounce names, so bear with me. Long before the first white prospectors arrived on the high plains, the confluence where the South Platte River meets Cherry Creek was a geographic anchor for nomadic plains tribes, such as the Southern Arapaho and the Cheyenne. Under the terms of the 1851 Treaty of Fort Laramie, this region was recognized as native territory. The tribes moved across the grasslands seasonally to track bison migrations, but during the winter months, they established camps. The site provided protection from winter winds, a supply of cottonwood for fuel, and water, making it a regular location for indigenous trade and intertribal council. But in May of 1858, a prospecting party led by Green Russell discovered flecks of placer gold in the creek beds near present-day 20th and Blake Streets. The news spread rapidly across the U.S., triggering the Pikes Peak Gold Rush and driving an immediate wave of thousands of fortune seekers directly into native land. The sudden loss of resources and rapid territorial encroachment caused regional conflicts, culminating in a historic Colorado War of 1864. This tension directly shaped Denver's early leadership, including Territorial Governor John Evans and Colonel John Chivington, who in November of 1864, Chivington led a regiment of Colorado Volunteer Cavalry, heavily recruited from the saloons and mining camps of Denver, 70 miles southeast of the city to Sand Creek. They launched a dawn attack on a peaceful camp of Southern Cheyenne families who had been promised military protection, killing over 150 native people. By 1867, subsequent federal treaties forced the surviving tribes entirely out of the territory onto distant reservations, clearing the region for permanent white development and leaving the indigenous footprint visible mainly in place names like Arapahoe County. The permanent city of Denver was born directly out of that initial 1858 gold rush chaos, starting as a collection of three separate but hostile frontier camps competing for survival across the water channels. In November of 1858, a land speculator from Pennsylvania named William Larimer Jr. arrived at the confluence. Finding a town site called St. Charles on the eastern bank of Cherry Creek, temporarily abandoned by its founders, Larimer illegally jumped the claim, laid down cottonwood logs to mark his territory, and formed the Denver City Town Company. Larimer chose the name to honor James W. Denver, who was serving as the governor of the Kansas Territory, which technically encompassed the region. This was a calculated political maneuver to secure federal favor. Larimer fully expected the governor to reward him by naming his camp the permanent county seat. He was, however, completely unaware that Governor Denver, frustrated by frontier politics, had already resigned his office and left the territory by the time the town company was platted. Larimer's new settlement faced immediate commercial competition from Arroyo, a camp established on the opposite bank of Cherry Creek by miners from Georgia, and a third camp called Highland platted across the South Platte River. The rival camps spent months sabotaging each other's ferries and undercutting merchant prices. Realizing that this division would destroy their chances of attracting long-term investment, the three communities held a lantern-lit meeting on the frozen creek bed and formally merged in December of 1859 into a single municipality under a unified city council. When Congress organized the Colorado Territory in 1861, the legislature officially incorporated the town of Denver City on November 7, 1861. The name was formally shortened to Denver in 1866, and in 1867, the city successfully petitioned to become the territorial capital, wresting the title from the neighboring mining supply town of Golden. During the Civil War years, Denver stood firmly aligned with the Union, serving as a strategic supply depot for the West. Territorial Governor William Gilpin used unbacked federal drafts to raise the first Colorado infantry, recruiting heavily from Denver's legal and mining communities. In late 1862, under the command of Denver lawyer Colonel John Slow, these volunteer troops marched 400 miles south into New Mexico through freezing mountain passes. They intercepted a Confederate cavalry advance at the Battle of Glorieta Pass, successfully destroying the Southern supply train and forcing a full retreat, thereby permanently neutralizing the Confederate threat to the Rocky Mountain goldfields and securing Denver's safety. Following the war, the city faced a sudden economic crisis that threatened its existence. In the late 1860s, engineers constructing the nation's transcontinental railroad announced that the tracks would bypass Denver entirely, choosing a much lower, easier mountain pass through Cheyenne, Wyoming, 100 miles to the north. Realizing that isolation would drop Denver off the map and turn it into a ghost town, local business leaders refused to surrender. So in 1867, John Evans, Walter Cheeseman, and David Moffett organized the local Board of Trade and launched an aggressive civic fundraising campaign. They walked door to door through the business district, convincing local merchants, saloon keepers, and laborers to buy stock, successfully raising $300,000 in just 3 days. They incorporated the Denver Pacific Railroad and hired local crews to build a 66-mile line linking Denver north to the Union Pacific Track in Cheyenne, completing the connection in June of 1870. This railroad strategy permanently altered the fate of the city. Denver instantly transformed into the primary transportation, supply, and wholesale hub for the entire Front Range, shipping heavy mining machinery into the mountains and hauling agricultural goods to eastern markets. The railroads concentrated industrial wealth downtown, and the city's population exploded from under 5,000 residents in 1870 to over 133,000 by 1900. As this wealth poured in, the city split into distinct neighborhoods that developed their own boundaries and social identities, functioning much like separate communities within a county. The oldest commercial zone is Lodo, or Lower Downtown, which sits directly around the original river confluence. Because William Larimer platted his original blocks parallel to the South Platte River rather than the true compass points, Lodo sits at a distinct 45-degree angle. When later surveyors expanded the city, they switched to a standard north-south compass grid, creating a series of jagged triangular intersections where the two layouts collide at Broadway. Lodo developed as a dense warehouse district anchored by the construction of the ornate Union Station Terminal in 1881, which was later rebuilt in the current Beaux Arts form in 1914. The neighborhood housed wholesale grocers, farm implement dealers, and rail manufacturing plants. As rail traffic declined after World War II, Lodo fell into severe urban decay, becoming a district of vacant multi-story brick buildings. In the late 1960s, the city's Urban Renewal Board planned to bulldoze the entire district to make way for modern high-rises. In response, a local preservationist named Dana Crawford organized a coalition of private investors. They systematically bought up the Victorian brick structures along the 1400 block of Larimer Street, known as Larimer Square, proving that the old buildings could be restored into a successful pedestrian retail and dining district. This grassroots effort led to the formal creation of the Lower Downtown Historic District in 1983, saving the city's architectural birthplace from demolition. It was during the 1980s push that preservationists and real estate developers coined the acronym LODO as a deliberate marketing tool, rebranding the area's rough Skid Row image into a trendy historic destination. Directly across the historic Cherry Creek Channel lies Aurora, the neighborhood that marks Denver's oldest formal settlement site. Named by its Georgia founders after a gold mining town in their home state, Aurora began as a residential area for working-class laborers, miners, and tradesmen. Over the decades, it grew into a pretty diverse neighborhood filled with brick Victorian cottages and churches, built by waves of German, Irish, and Latino immigrants. However, because it was constructed on a low-lying floodplain, this community was repeatedly damaged by flash floods along Cherry Creek, including major deluges in 1864 and 1933. The neighborhood's residential history ended following the catastrophic Front Range flood of June 1965, which triggered a destructive region-wide flood that forced the city to completely rethink its urban planning along the riverbanks. The city utilized federal urban renewal funds to clear the entire floodplain, permanently displacing the long-standing immigrant neighborhood. The city converted the land into a single higher education campus that today houses the University of Colorado Denver, Metropolitan State University, and the Community College of Denver. The only surviving remnant of the original neighborhood is 9th Street Park, a single block of restored 19th century Victorian houses preserved as a living museum in the center of the campus. As the city's wealth grew during the silver boom of the late 19th century, the political and financial elite moved away from the industrial river bottoms to build their estates on the high ground of Capitol Hill. This neighborhood developed around the construction of the Colorado State Capitol building. It was completed in 1894. In 1908, the state covered the Capitol dome in gold leaf to honor the region's mining history. The basement of the Capitol serves as the official 1 mile above sea level marker. The surrounding streets became a showcase for the Gilded Age wealth, lined with large stone mansions built by silver barons and real estate tycoons, including the 1889 Victorian brownstone home of Titanic survivor Margaret Molly Brown. Brown used her wealth and position on Capitol Hill to fund social reforms, establishing the Denver Women's Club and fighting for the rights of Western miners. When the silver market collapsed during the silver crash of 1893, the repeal of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act caused 12 Denver banks to fail in a single 3-day period. Many of these prominent families were instantly ruined, and the ground estates of Capitol Hill were gradually partitioned into cheap boarding houses and apartments. Today, the neighborhood has evolved into Denver's most densely populated residential district. The physical expansion of Denver away from the downtown core was driven by the development of an extensive electric streetcar network during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The Denver Tramway Company, formed in 1886, electrified lines along major trails, pushing transport corridors across the city. Tracks ran north across the river to the Highlands, south down Broadway toward Fort Logan, and east along Colfax Avenue to Aurora. By 1915, streetcar lines covered every major urban corridor, and over half of Denver's population used the streetcar daily for commuting and moving freight. This infrastructure dictated the creation of distinct streetcar suburbs. To the south, the area originally known as South Broadway grew along the tracks and was eventually renamed the Baker neighborhood in the 1970s after Baker Junior High School, which honored James Hutchins Baker, a prominent local educator and president of the University of Colorado. To the east, Park Hill was platted in 1885 by a developer named Baron Alois von Winkler, who named the neighborhood explicitly for its geographic position on a gentle hill overlooking the newly created city park. Northwest of downtown, the Highlands neighborhood grew rapidly because its elevation made it a clean water refuge from the early polluted downtown core, protecting residents from the typhoid outbreaks that regularly swept through the low-lying downtown wells. It was platted as the independent town of Highlands in 1875, where residents fiercely maintained a moral, temperance-focused identity by banning saloons and gambling entirely. That is, until Denver annexed them in 1896 and took it over. City planners designed broad parkways and island parks to accommodate these streetcar lines, leaving behind a legacy of wide boulevards that still define the city's layout long after the streetcar tracks were removed in 1950. The streetcar lines also created some unique structural intersections, such as the five-way junction of Washington Street, Walton Street, 26th Avenue, 27th Street, and Colfax Avenue that gave the Five Points neighborhood its name. Because of housing segregation and redlining practices in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, black residents were prevented from buying property in other parts of Denver, forcing them to settle in Five Points. In response to this exclusion, the residents built a self-sufficient business district along the Walton Street corridor, establishing black-owned banks, insurance firms, hotels, and newspapers that earned the neighborhood the title the Harlem of the West. Pardon the interruption. The rest of that video got corrupted somehow, and I didn't notice it until I was already back in Kentucky. So here I am redoing it here, where unfortunately humidity exists. By the mid-20th century, the neighborhood's Rossonian Hotel Lounge became a primary stop on the National Jazz Circuit. A lot of folks who perform late-night sets there because downtown luxury hotels refused to rent rooms to black artists. Today, the neighborhood preserves this history through the Five Points Cultural District, the annual Five Points Jazz Festival, and the state's largest Juneteenth celebrations. As these residential suburbs expanded, industry concentrated along the rail lines in northern Denver, shaping the working-class neighborhoods of Globeville and Elira, and Swansea, whose names directly reflect their corporate and immigrant foundations. Globeville was formally incorporated as an independent town in 1891, taking its name from the Globe Smelting and Refining Company, which opened there in 1889 and dominated the local economy. Just to the east, Elyria was platted by land developers in the late 1800s and named after the town in Ohio that shares its name, the hometown of the lead developer's wife. Adjacent to it, Swansea was named by early industrial miners after the famous copper smelting city of Swansea, Wales, a direct nod to the Welsh immigrant expertise that powered Denver's early refining furnaces. These districts housed large smelting plants, lead refining businesses, and rail repair yards that drew waves of Slavic, German, Russian, and later Latino immigrants. In 1888, the city established the Union Stockyards on the South Platte River in this northern industrial zone, anchoring meatpacking plants and grain elevators along the riverfront. To the south, manufacturing hubs like the Gates Rubber Company, established in 1919, occupied large industrial tracts that employed thousands of local residents. While these heavy industries declined in the late 20th century, the rail yards and factories left a lasting environmental legacy, and modern infrastructure projects like the Central 70 highway widening have focused on reconnecting these historically northern neighborhoods to the rest of the city. The stabilization of these urban neighborhoods eventually required substantial engineering intervention along the banks of Cherry Creek, which flows directly through the upscale neighborhood that bears its name. Originally a valley filled with small farms and wild chokeberry shrubs, Cherry Creek was prone to sudden flash floods that routinely threatened downtown commerce. In 1950, the United States Army Corps of Engineers completed the Cherry Creek Dam project southeast of the city, creating a reservoir that permanently controlled the waterway's flow. With the flood risk removed, the neighborhood transformed into an elite commercial and residential enclave. In the mid-20th century, developers established Cherry Creek North, replacing old industrial yards with an outdoor shopping and gallery district. In 1923, Benjamin Stapleton was elected mayor of Denver. Stapleton was a high-ranking member of the KKK, which had immense political power in Colorado during the 1920s, controlling the governorship, the state legislature, and Denver's police department. During his administration, Stapleton focused heavily on municipal infrastructure, and in 1929, he opened Denver Municipal Airport on attractive land on the Eastern Plains. Following World War II, the airport was renamed Stapleton International Airport in his honor, and a large master-planned residential neighborhood grew around that aviation hub. In 1995, the airport was officially closed when commercial aviation moved further east. And in 2020, following decades of community pressure regarding the mayor's verified KKK history, the residents of the neighborhood voted formally to strip his name from the community, legally rebranding the neighborhood as Central Park. Denver's modern economic profile was established by its final expansion onto the plains. Ground broke in 1991 for Denver International Airport, which officially opened in February of 1995 to replace the closed Stapleton facility. Occupying a 53 square mile expanse, this airport features a tented fabric roof designed to mimic the snow-capped Rocky Mountains and has grown into one of the busiest airports on Earth, handling over 80 million passengers annually. I won't get into the hoodoo of that. But today, the Consolidated City and County of Denver operates under a strong mayor system led by Mayor Mike Johnston, governing a population of 715,000 residents. The modern economy relies on the technology, finance, aerospace, and healthcare sectors, anchored by corporate offices such as VF Corporation and Newmont Mining, as well as Denver Public Schools, which is the city's largest single employer. Urban development since 2020 has focused on higher density infill housing to manage rising costs, implementing the comprehensive Denverite plan to guide land use, and deploying sustainability initiatives to expand transit-oriented development around its modern light rail lines. So, that's Denver. What'd I get wrong this time?